Teaching and Learning in Art and Design. This is one of our spring lecture series. I'm really delighted to be able to sort of introduce Clara Lieu to you. Many of you perhaps have been taught by Clara. I didn't know anything about Clara until about a year ago when on Facebook, one of our former graduate students said, "You got to get this person, Clara Lieu, and you got to read her book, Learn, Create and Teach." So I got the book, and then I actually met many other of Clara's students who said that she's an amazing teacher. One of the other things that I do here at RISD is that I direct Project Open Door, which is a college access program for high school students. And we've actually got several of them here at the moment, which is great. And we were looking for another faculty member. We have a real great stable of RISD faculty members who work with our portfolio students. And so I approached Clara and asked her whether she would come and teach for us. And I've just been blown away by the quality of her work. It's really extraordinary. So I've really come here tonight to find out what the secret is, so that I can share it with other people. And I think she's going to be pretty generous and indeed in sharing what it is that she does. The other thing that I actually admire about the work is her commitment to the documentation of her pedagogy. You just have to go to our website, and she keeps meticulous accounts of all of her work, and I think that is really, truly impressive. So I'm delighted that she's here, interested, excited to see and to hear what she has to share with us. So I'd like to welcome Clara to RISD.
Thank you, Paul. In my life, I've been a student, a professional, and a teacher. As a student, I looked forward to being a professional, but I couldn't imagine being a teacher. As a professional, I missed being a student, and I was eager to teach. As a teacher, I no longer take formal classes, but I've tried to internalize the kind of thinking that had been demanded of me as a student. I believe that no matter what stage you're at, there is always something to learn, something to create, and something to teach. These three roles are critical to leading a creative life. This lecture is based on my book, Learn, Create, and Teach, A Guide to Building a Creative Life. The book is a series of 60 short essays providing practical, no-nonsense advice for how to live a creative life. I'll provide a selection of those essays tonight. So we'll start with the student section. We'll begin with work, work, work. All great artists have one thing in common. They all work like hell. There's a common myth that you have to be in the mood to make your artwork. If you follow this, you might be waiting your entire life to make anything. Chuck Close said, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work." You can't control who you meet, who likes your work. You can, however, control how much time, labor, and thought goes into your art. Make art for yourself. If you're making your art to please your teacher, you're barking up the wrong tree. I've heard many students say, "What does Clara want to see? What does Clara like? Clara wouldn't like that. Don't do it." They base their creative decisions on what they think I will like. It's pointless, if you think about it, to create work solely to please an individual. You need to fulfill your own creative desires. Learn to let go. Students ask me all the time if they can redo their projects. This usually leads to kicking a dead horse. One of my former teachers used to say, "You can't polish a turd." Usually, it's better to accept what you've learned and move on. Lose yourself to find yourself. I encourage my students each week to try on a contrasting identity. One week, they're making tight, detailed drawings. The next week, they're working on painterly, gestural pieces. Eventually, you'll emerge with a stronger definition of who you are. Have no fear. If I could be a student again, I would have been less afraid and I would have taken more risks. I was petrified of failure. I told myself that as long as my work was technically well rendered, I would be successful. My junior year at RISD, I elected to go to the European Honors Program in Rome, which was a study abroad program for an entire year. I spent the whole year making perfectly rendered drawings. So these drawings you're looking at now were all drawn on site. I went to cathedrals all over France, traveled all across Italy, doing these perfectly rendered drawings. My sense of regret, looking back at this work, is palpable. In 2010, I started working on a series of 50 self-portraits called Falling, based on my personal experience with depression. Up until that point, I'd always kept an emotional distance from my artwork. So these images you're looking at here are from 2 previous bodies of work that depicted anonymous figures and explored themes of social isolation. I was always interested in human emotions, but I never said that it was actually about me. After being diagnosed and treated for depression, I realized that I had this incredible topic to explore. And so these images you're looking at here are from the Falling series. The problem was that I was afraid. Making this artwork meant that I had to reveal my illness, which even today carries a heavy stigma. I went ahead and I did it anyway. Many people have told me that Falling is my best work to date. And now I see fear as a signal that I'm headed in the right direction. Ideas will always prevail over technique. I went to art school with plenty of people who could run circles around me with their technical skills. If that's the case, what possible chance do I have to distinguish myself? At the end of the day, it's the ideas that matter. Good technique will only take you so far. So every semester, I give my students an assignment to make a drawing based on one of their personal routines. The projects range from embarrassingly funny to heartbreaking to just plain odd. So here's an example of one of the students' routine drawings, and this student said that she had an obsession with chocolate pudding. She realized that she had a problem when she once sat down and ate 9 pudding cups within a period of 20 minutes. So she did a drawing of a towering portion of empty pudding cups. This student had a deeply religious upbringing. She was asked to go to Bible study pretty much every day before regular school hours. She was also a leader in her youth group at Sunday school, and yet she didn't believe. And so in this drawing, she explored her own inner conflicts about her church and religion. This student was forced to go to therapy by her parents in high school. So she used to rebel by going to Target and stealing Hello Kitty paraphernalia. This student's mother was a drug addict when she was growing up and was extremely negligent, so much so that there were days when she refused to take her daughter to school because it was too much trouble. So this student said that every time this happened, she would sit down with a TV guide and circle all the TV shows that she wanted to watch that day. And she drew alongside of it the dirty dishes that were accumulating because of her mother's negligence. Frequently, the ideas are sitting right in front of us. We just haven't realized their importance. See every assignment as an opportunity. If you treat your homework as homework, that's all it's going to be. If you treat your homework as a chance to push your boundaries and do something ambitious, that's what it will be. So I once gave an assignment to my freshman drawing class at RISD called Layers. And so usually in the morning, whenever we show up to class, everybody hangs up their work on the wall. We walk around, we look at the pieces. So these are some examples of some of the responses to that homework assignment. And you can see, looking at these images, that the majority of students responded in a pretty loose manner. A lot of them were working with sort of ideas of abstraction. They were sort of interpreting the word layers very loosely. And then we're walking around the room, and I come to this drawing. And I'm thinking to myself in my head, what the hell is he trying to pull off? So we go to the group critique, and I always ask the students to say just a few words before we actually critique the piece. And so this student said, well, Clara, I looked up the word layer in the dictionary, and a layer is a chicken that lays eggs, so I drew layers. He had an airtight premise, and I couldn't nail him on a thing. See the parameters of an assignment as a departure point where the final destination is in your hands. Ask for help. Lots of students are afraid or intimidated to ask teachers for help. They worry that the teacher will think that they're deficient or even stupid. Actually, it's quite the opposite. I have tremendous respect for students who can acknowledge that things aren't going so well and who are taking the initiative to do something about it. Some of the best conversations I've had have been with students who came to me seeking help. Get to know your teachers. Teachers are people too. You'll be very pleasantly surprised if you take the initiative to get to know them. When you can, choose your courses based on the teacher. A wonderful teacher can make the most mundane subject exciting, while a poor teacher can ruin even your favorite project. I have 2 former professors who I call when things get rough. I come away with our conversations with a renewed sense of inspiration and a reminder that someone out there believes in me. I've known both of them since I was 19, and they are the rocks that I rely on. Both of them have stood by me through every professional accomplishment and disappointment. Don't burn any bridges. The person standing next to you in line at the cafeteria the other day could one day be in a position to positively impact your career, and vice versa. This sounds ridiculous, but if you think about it, your peers are the future generation of artists and teachers. You and your teachers could become colleagues someday. Be nice and know that it can and will come back to you. Word gets around pretty fast about who's a pain in the ass to work with. I learned this the hard way. So when I just graduated from RISD, I entered a competition at a commercial gallery up in Boston. I got accepted into the show, which for me at the time was a pretty big deal. I had only been out of school for about a year or so. So I went to the gallery to drop off my work, and I ended up in a contentious conversation with the gallery owner. He told me nobody wants to buy big paintings, and that he didn't want my painting to be the most expensive piece in the show. I had a heated argument with him, and eventually we compromised on a final price, which was $100 more than he had initially wanted. My piece was the only painting that sold in the entire exhibition. Sure, I had the last laugh, but at what cost? That was one bridge I wouldn't be able to cross again. Okay, let's move on to the professional section of the lecture. Make time. People always ask me, how do you possibly have time to make your artwork on top of teaching, your family, and life in general? All the time, I hear students, I hear professionals say they would do their artwork if only they had the time. If you keep saying this long enough, that big project that you've been waiting to do will simply never happen. I learned the ultimate lesson in time management my freshman year in my 3-dimensional design class. So the first day of class, the professor sat us down, and he gave us an assignment to create a 16-piece chess set, 16 sculptures based on an artist or genre. I chose to do Renaissance tomb sculpture, and I decided that I was going to cast blocks of plaster and carve them with dental tools. The project was due on the last day of class and was to be completed on top of our other assignments. The last day of class, the results were startling. Out of 20 students, only 5 of us had finished all 16 pieces, and many students came in with just 2 or 3 pieces. I finished the project, but at an expense. I spent every waking hour of my Thanksgiving vacation in my parents' basement, furiously carving away at these plaster blocks because I hadn't started early enough. I nearly injured my hands because I had packed so much of the final project into the last weeks of the semester. And I remember taking about 2 or 3 weeks to fully recover afterwards. But I finished, and to this day, I have never missed a deadline. Now, I ask myself, what needs to get done? in the next 30 minutes, and I put all of my energy and focus on that. I create false deadlines to make sure that nothing gets missed. I write everything down. I do things immediately, because if I don't, they won't get done. An hour here, an hour there, and those hours do add up over time. Never, ever stop making your art. I'd rather be making the worst art I could possibly imagine than nothing at all. So when I graduated from RISD with a BFA in illustration in 1998, I felt aimless and lost. I had the worst job I've ever had, working at a public elementary school's after-school program. So picture this, 120 elementary-age kids and 8 teachers in a school cafeteria every day. It was pure pandemonium. From time to time, I would do some life drawing, the occasional self-portrait, but nothing really substantial. I was sort of grazing. I was full of excuses. I was tired after a long day at work. I didn't have money for art supplies. I didn't have a professional studio. So one day I was walking around in Boston and I randomly ran into one of my former RISD professors. It was kind of neat because we had always had a really great rapport, so I was very happy to see him. So we chatted a little bit, and then he said to me, "So Clara, how's your artwork going?" I was so ashamed. I just wanted to die. I said, "Really, I've kind of been doing nothing. You know, I don't have a lot of money. I'm so exhausted all the time." And he said to me very firmly, "Clara, you are one of my very best students. You have to make your art." So we exchanged contact information, and he offered to look at my work every once in a while. After that day, I decided that it was time to stop making excuses and get to work. So what I did is I bought a tiny, inexpensive printmaking press, and I decided to make dry point prints in my apartment living room. They were 4 inches by 5 inches, small enough that I could print on that press. I went broke hiring models for my figure paintings. After all, when you've gone through all of the trouble to hire a model and they show up at your door, you're not exactly going to tell them that you don't feel like it that day. I called my former teacher from time to time, and I brought my work to show him. Within 2 years, I had my first professional body of work and was ready to apply for graduate school. Create opportunities. My book, Learn, Create, and Teach, was prompted by my frustration with the lack of professional opportunities available to many mid-career artists. So one night, I was feeling upset because I felt like my career was stagnating. I had just sent out a mailing of postcards. I had updated all my websites. I felt like there wasn't anything to do. In my frustration and boredom, I sat down and I started writing blog posts titled, "How to be a good art student," "What I've learned so far," and "How to be a good art teacher." I sent out the blog posts to my friends, my students, and my colleagues. The response was big, and one student said to me, "Seriously, you should write a book." Since then, my role as a writer has blossomed, and I now write an advice column, Ask the Art Professor, for the Huffington Post. Be ready. When you get that wonderful, unexpected opportunity, you've got to be ready, and you can't be caught unprepared. I don't know what it is, but every time something happens that's a great opportunity, it always happens really fast, and you usually have no time to do it. You want to make sure that you document everything and that you organize yourself. So these images are in-progress shots of a number of my pieces over the past number of years that I regularly update to my blog. So a few years ago, totally out of the blue, I had an international publisher who contacted me, and they invited me to propose a book about drawing. I was really excited. I was given really tight deadlines, though, and I had to scramble for content. I had to contact colleagues, students, to get images, to get information. I submitted my materials, worked like a crazy person for about 2 weeks, but then I never heard from the publisher again, and the project died. At the time, it was a huge disappointment. But when I started working on my book, I realized that I already had a lot of material that was ready to go. That material served as a launching pad for my book. Find or create a network of artists. When we create art, we are usually alone. This is why social interactions with other artists are so critical. Even the smallest gatherings matter. You want to take the initiative and the time to reach out to people in person. You'll be very pleasantly surprised by the results. Go to open studios events, meet other artists in person, attend gallery openings, art events, and lectures, take a workshop or a class, get a studio in an artist studio building, do a residency, have lunch with your colleagues. Don't eliminate yourself. Apply for everything imaginable. You've got basically nothing to lose and everything to gain. Gather materials, fill out the forms, submit the application, and then forget about it. I hear people say all the time, oh, I'm not going to apply for that. I'm not good enough. They'd never hire me. I'm not going to get that grant. A student of mine a few years ago was once nominated by the faculty in her department here at RISD to apply for a prestigious summer program. Just being nominated was huge. It was very competitive. She was up against all the other students in the department, and she was the one that they had chosen to apply for the program. 3 days before the deadline, she came to me and declared that she wasn't going to apply. She thought that her work wasn't strong enough. We had a tough conversation. She applied, and a month later was accepted into the program. Accept rejection. Rejection happens to everyone. We've all been there. When I see that thin letter in the mail, I know. Most rejections are standard and polite, but some are not. I once applied for a part-time teaching position. The person who wrote back to me made a special point of describing explicitly how unqualified I was to be teaching at that school. I was once told that my work wasn't accepted for an exhibition because the work would have to be very commanding to be able to fill their gallery space. Rejection is essentially a basic requirement of being an artist. If you're not being rejected, it means you're not getting your work out there. Think about rejection as part of your process. Get used to it and move on. Follow up and say thank you. I am shocked at how few people do this. So for 4 years, I was the gallery director at the Jewett Gallery at Wellesley College. So these are some shots of the gallery. And for a few years, they used to invite me here to the Fine Arts Career Fair, where basically they have curators, they have gallery directors, people working in nonprofit organizations, and they come and they review the student portfolios, which is an incredible experience for the students. They get a chance to talk to people in person who they normally wouldn't have access to. And I'll tell you, in all the years that I did that event, I've only had one person contact me after the event. So one year, I saw this student's work that I thought was really terrific. And we talked about it at the review. I was very enthusiastic about it. And I think it was about a year later, I was curating an exhibition at the gallery at Wellesley College, and immediately I thought about his work. The images were sort of burned in my brain. But I realized that I didn't have his information because he had failed to follow up. To this day, I remember his artwork, but not the name. All right, we're moving on to the teacher section of the lecture. Start tough. The first day of class is very important. Every single gesture that you make from the start counts and will be heavily scrutinized by your students. One of my colleagues fusses every semester about what to wear on the first day of class. She tries to find an outfit that says, "I'm very accessible, but don't mess with me." I have another colleague who always wears a suit jacket. On the first day of class, you want to be upfront, transparent, and direct. You want to set high expectations and clear objectives. And you want to provide concrete logistics about how the class will run. Be consistent and reliable. You want to establish firm credibility from the beginning and stick with it. If you hand out a syllabus, follow it. Students come to depend on consistency and structure. If you jump all over the place, class time becomes a major source of anxiety for many students. With a predictable schedule, students know in advance what is required, and this prevents confusion for both you and them. Push your students. Many teachers are afraid to push their students because they worry about negative repercussions. Push your students further than they're willing to go. Your students will rise to the challenge, and you'll be very pleasantly surprised at how many of them want to be pushed. Someone once wrote on my course evaluation, "Clara whipped my ass and I loved every minute of it." Learn by teaching. This seems like a contradiction because in theory, if you're teaching a course, it should mean that you have mastery and experience in that subject. Explaining a process to somebody else requires you to have a true understanding of the subject inside out. Teaching brings a new level of clarity to your subject. So one semester I was teaching a sculpture class, and we were going to start casting these projects in plaster. They're plastiline figure sculptures that we were making. So on the supply list, I wrote butter knife, thinking it was clear enough. And of course, the butter knife was that one tool that you absolutely had to have. You could not do anything without that butter knife. So I thought, okay, butter knife, that's easy enough. Following week, I saw a plastic butter knife, a palette knife, a scraper, and a pastry knife. Only one student out of 6 brought what I thought I had requested. I learned quickly that even the smallest details are critical to teaching. On a more fundamental level, my experience with intaglio printmaking wasn't solidified until I taught a beginning course. Up until that point, my background in intaglio printmaking was scattered and fragmented. I had taken a winter session course as a freshman at RISD in intaglio printmaking that was very haphazard and all over the place. I couldn't remember half of what I learned that semester. In graduate school, I did a number of experiments in intaglio printmaking, in monotype, in woodcut, but we had a terrible print shop that was poorly equipped, and so I had difficulty kind of learning the real way to do things. So I was feeling a little bit all over the place myself, but I was expected to prepare the students for the advanced intaglio printmaking classes. So there was pressure on me to cover all of the techniques. I felt like a complete fake, and I was forced to compensate throughout the semester. I tested every single technique, of where there are many in intaglio printmaking. I troubleshooted every single demonstration, which was pretty much every week, and I wrote extensive technical notes for my students. By the time the course was over, I felt like I could call myself a legitimate printmaker. Emphasize face-to-face interactions. When I first started teaching, I used to email students all the time to communicate various things. This was a big mistake. With email, misunderstandings occur all too frequently. I once got a 5-paragraph email from a student who went on and on and on about what a terrible person I was, how dare I judge her, that I knew nothing about what kind of person she was. I was very concerned after reading that email. So I wrote back to her and I said, you know what, we should sit down, we should talk about this in person, because clearly you have a lot of concerns that we really need to talk about. So we sat down face to face, and she said to me, oh no, it's okay, everything's fine. Real conversations keep people in check. And now I insist on speaking to my students in person whenever possible, and I limit email to cut and dry conversations. Always keep your cool. Never underestimate the power of a cool, collected tone of voice. I once had a student yell at me in front of a class during a group critique. I said something that he didn't like, and so he said to me, Clara, that is the most insulting thing you could ever say to me, pretty much at the top of his lungs in front of everybody. And so I said to him in a very calm voice, you and I will have a conversation about this later. let's move on. He was fuming. But he had to accept that response, and that ended the conversation quickly without further drama. Develop a genuine interest in every single student. Get to know your students. Make a series of small gestures to let them know that you're interested in them. Remember nicknames. Strike up conversations during breaks and ask them how they're doing. I found that if you open the door, students have a lot to talk about. Evolve. Treat yourself and your course as a developing organism. At the end of every semester, I always tweak my courses. I think about what worked, what didn't, and what I can change for the better. As painful as it is sometimes, I always read my course evaluations. Actually, they're very entertaining sometimes, but I do take them seriously. I change assignments, I insert new ones, and I eliminate ones that aren't working. I think it was a few years ago, I once gave an assignment that I called Infinite Space. I don't know what I was thinking, but the following week, when the students came in with their assignments, I basically had images of black holes and landscapes. That assignment is gone. Tap into your personal perspective. At the end of the semester, I always present a slideshow of over 400 images of my work, of which you'll see a sampling here. This slideshow is unique in that it starts in high school. Quite possibly the worst, most embarrassing years of my life. I had 2 friends at the time and I hated both of them. Moving through to my undergraduate years at RISD, which is the point in my life where I felt like things couldn't have possibly gotten better. I couldn't believe that a place like RISD actually existed. So these images that you're looking at here were done in my foundation studies year, where I experimented in a number of different materials, working in drawing, design, and in 3D. I spent 1 semester in the painting department, the first semester of my sophomore year, and eventually then transitioned into the illustration department, which actually ended up being a much better fit for me at the time. I spent 4 years trying to be an artist on my own. I really wanted to experiment a little bit before I went back to graduate school to finish my degree. This included a very short-lived stint as a portrait painter, quite possibly one of the most hellish jobs I've ever had in my entire life. I moved on to a master's degree in sculpture, an area in which I had very little experience, but was very excited to work with. So this was my master's thesis, a very large sculpture installation executed in hydrocal. During this time, I also rediscovered printmaking and actually ended up doing an interdisciplinary project that involved woodcuts, intaglio prints, and also a series of monotypes. Then, the slideshow concludes with my most recent professional work. So the slideshow is a funny one in that it's sort of all over the place in terms of the variety and range that's out there, and not all of it is necessarily good. But what I aim to show is the dramatic transformations that one artist can have over a period of time through the variety of work that is shown. If you can, relate your points back to your own personal experiences. These stories will be much more effective than abstract descriptions. Living as an artist means that you have to feel ongoing yearning, doubt, worry, and passion. Every day, I worry about whether I can live up to my own standards. I doubt my abilities and question if I can achieve my goals. And as grueling as it can be, I savor every minute of the process. I love moments when I'm so engaged with my work that time disappears. This is what I live for. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Clara,
interesting. I wrote that book so quickly. I think I did it in about 1 month. It just totally poured out. It's almost like it was writing itself, which is unusual because I get artist block like every week. So I don't know what it was about that book, but I sort of felt this urgency that I had all these ideas that I needed to put down on paper. And actually, artist block is something that I address in the book because I think most of us here as practicing artists have had that experience of, just banging our head up against the wall for weeks on end, feeling like nothing, is coming of it. And I think that's actually a very natural part of the creative process. But the book, for some reason, was easy. It just kind of came out really quickly.
Did you always think that you would be a teacher?
I actually fell into teaching totally by accident. The way I got started teaching was actually in high school. They had an internship program for seniors. So if you had completed a certain number of credits up until that point, instead of attending regular classes, they allowed you to do an internship somewhere else. And, I was a senior. I was like, get me out of here. Let's figure out the quickest way I can make that happen. So I thought, okay, I'll look up my elementary school art teacher who I'd had a great relationship with, and I'll ask her if I can be a student teacher in her classroom. I mean, at the time, I was like just trying to find a way to not go to class. But, it ended up being this wonderful experience. I loved the students. I loved the energy. And then as a RISD student, I started teaching at camps for students in the elementary school age. And then when I got out of school, I started teaching at an after-school program. And then after that, I started teaching at a private school. So it's sort of like one thing sort of led to another, and I just kind of never got off the train. It just kind of kept going. People ask me that all the time because I have people say things to me like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome if you didn't have to teach and you could just sit in your studio all day and do all your work and not worry about money or anything? And my answer to that actually is, well, no, I think it wouldn't be great, actually, because for me, at least, the teaching experience is so closely intertwined with my own artistic practice that for one to suddenly disappear wouldn't make sense in my practice. So, there's a teacher here at RISD, and his answer was, I'm going to teach until I drop dead. So I think my answer is somewhere along those lines.
Don't drop dead. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Another question? Sorry, I missed it.
I had the pleasure of doing your freshman foundation class, and as I was leaving and walking down the stairs, I heard one of the students who had just gotten a pretty tough critique of honesty. And she said, I respect that so much, so much. And so I'm curious how you balance pushing students and also you mentioned the book that you want to hear people, finding that balance. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
It's very hard. I mean, one thing that I talk about in the book is trying to be multidimensional. That as a teacher, you have to be willing to make your students do things that are very uncomfortable, that are very difficult for them, but you also have to be a safety net. You have to be there when they crash, and you have to let them know that they have that kind of support. So the thing that I find is the most critical in class, and specifically during group critiques, is honesty. I think is really important. Just being really direct with the students, backing things up with specific examples, trying to be detailed in your conversations, trying to avoid ambiguity so that they have concrete actions that they can take in order to accomplish what it is that they're trying to do. But it is very hard, and you have to accept that not everyone's going to be happy all the time if you project that sense of honesty. And it's something that I'm always working on. You never really hit it. It's sort of a work in progress at all times.